I've noticed something called atheism, and I've never, well, actually take that back. For a while I considered myself an atheist, and then I sort of jumped over to paganism. But that's a topic for a different video. I do realize now that I am actually an atheist, even if I never really considered myself that. And I have noticed, as I've been exploring the subject more, and looking at, theist claims of all stripes, and seeing how theists respond and try, rather, I say try to relate to atheists, but I think I use that kind of in a very loose term. But there are 5 questions that atheists get asked seemingly all the time. And I'm kind of hoping maybe I can kind of clear things up. As I've looked into all these questions myself, I've both seen responses and I've also considered the questions and thought about them a lot. So, 5 questions. Number 5, why do you believe in science? This question is basically what I like to consider a redundant, stupid question, because there's no belief in science. Science is an exploration of things that you observe, things that you test, and data that you gather that you are able to use to generate a conclusion about why what you observe happens. What is the machinations going on that makes occurrence X happen? There's no belief there. Belief pretty much stops past the, actually prior to the testing stage. A scientist might believe that when they see occurrence X and they don't know what's causing occurrence X, they may believe that a certain something is causing it. But once you get into the testing, that belief just vanishes, because now you're into gathering data, you're looking at the data objectively, and you're making experiments to test what is actually a hypothesis. That's the closest thing in science to a belief. But science doesn't stop at the hypothesis. Science just goes on to the theory that is a result of all the data collection, the experimenting, and basically the facts that have been developed. So there's no belief in science once you reach the theorem, once you reach the theory, which really is the end result of the knowledge that you have gathered. So atheists accept science, but they don't necessarily, are atheists because they accept science. Atheist is simply a lack of a belief in God. In fact, that's actually the number 4 question: why don't you believe in God? And atheists, by definition, reject the claim that a God exists. They don't believe in a God because they don't feel that the God has been demonstrated to be true and to actually exist. And it's actually very simple. Theists jump all over this because they think, my favorite point is, it takes just as much faith to be an atheist as it does to be a theist, First of all, even if that was true, which it's not, I'll get to that in a little bit, but just for the sake of argument, even if that was true, so what? So what? I mean, it takes, by your very argument, it takes just as much faith to be a Buddhist, to be a Muslim, to be a Pastafarian, to believe in the Greek pantheon, or any god you want to think of. By that argument, it takes the exact equal amount of faith to believe it. So why pick one over the other? I mean, really, when you take that argument, you need to stop and then add on to that. Okay, so what? Why is it, why did you take your point, Okay, so it takes faith to be an atheist. I have faith that there is no God because I haven't seen one. Why do you have faith that there is a God? I mean, it doesn't solve anything. It really doesn't. And getting back to my earlier point, that atheism is actually a rejection of a claim, that itself, while a stance is not a belief system, nor is it a worldview, and Matt Dillahunty on the Atheist Experience has brought this up many times. There's no tenets, there's no dogma, there's no worldview. It's just a rejection of a claim. That is a stance, but it is not a belief. Now, a stance is, until you prove it, I'm not going to believe it. And there's a difference between a belief system, saying, I believe that no gods exist at all. That is a belief. I don't particularly prescribe to that. I think now my own personal view on that particular stance is that God, as described, has not been properly defined, and as such is not provable based on the descriptions that we have been given, and therefore cannot be tested, cannot be demonstrated, and this has been brought up many times, is indistinguishable from that which does not exist. So until we come up with a proper definition that is testable, that is universally agreed upon by, really it would have to be all religions. I mean, all religions that believe in God would have to come together and agree, okay, this is the standards by which we define God. And once those standards have been established, then we can go out and test them. Now, until that point, I'm just going to go ahead, my personal stance is until we reach that point, I'm just going to go ahead and reject the claims that God exists because for the very reasons I just stated, it hasn't been properly defined, and there's been no effort to experimentally demonstrate or even mathematically prove with any sort of accuracy that God can exist. And that you'll find that's a pretty general. You can really paint that brush among almost all atheists. Now, some atheists do take the harder stance. Like I said, I believe that no gods exist, and here's why. And they have their own reasons. I'm not going to get into that. But those are my reasons, and I think you'll find that they jive with most atheists. Question number 3. This is one of my favorites. What reason do you have to be a good person? How can you be a moral person without believing in God? And the question is so nonsensical. It's funny. That's why it's my favorite, my personal favorite out of the 3. Because really, when you stop and think about it, we're all good people because we're taught to be good people by our peers, our family, our friends. We see things in the news. We see somebody do something to somebody else, and whoa, that's fucked up. We know internally that things that we do have both good consequences and bad. Now, a lot of it is taught. Certain things that some people think of are immoral, i.e. Abortion, premarital sex, homosexuality. These are things that are taught. You have to learn these things from other people. So when you say that morality comes from God, well, there's a flaw in that argument because the standard description of God is typically he or she that created everything. Well, that morality would have to apply equally, and morality does not apply equally. And it only takes flipping through Yahoo News to realize that morality is not applied equally to all people all over the earth. Okay, especially when it comes to religions. I mean, look at the Middle East right now. Look at the things that they're doing to each other that they consider moral because of the tenets of their religion. Things that atheists are screaming human rights violations, and these people need to be thrown in jail. Atheists internalize these things. We stop and look at our actions, and we realize, hey, if I do take this particular action, someone is either going to benefit or they're going to be hurt. Maybe no one will benefit. Maybe no one will be hurt. And that doesn't, mean it's immoral. But if someone does benefit, then we feel good. If someone is hurt, then we feel bad, and we decide, you know what? I need to make amends for this. The typical theist point of view is if you do something that God says is good, whether or not the other person is hurt or not, they just have to accept that you're a good person. If you do something that God says is bad, then you need to beg God for forgiveness. If somebody else gets hurt, well, again, that's their tough shit. It's up to you to go to, the priest, the synagogue, or who the fuck ever, and say, hey, God, forgive me for hurting that person, and, God will make, and then you go to that person and say, God will make amends for my transgression. Fuck that, okay? That's bullshit. That is just a total bullshit moral system. If you're going to do something and you hurt somebody, then you need to make amends for that. If you're not going to make amends for that, it makes you immoral. And that's a typical atheist stance. You don't rely on an external source of morality. Not a supernatural external source of morality. I mean, we rely on the reactions of other people. An excellent example, those who are into BDSM. Now, they do inflict pain on one another, but they do so with the knowledge that the person that they are inflicting pain on is is willing to accept that pain, or willing to accept a certain amount of pain, a level of pain, inflicted in certain ways. I mean, the person inflicting the pain is not being immoral because they're actually benefiting the other person. So that's one of those examples where really we have to internalize morality. There's no blanket morality. I can't just walk up to anybody with a flogger and just start whipping them, and then say, well, hey, I'm into BDSM, and that automatically makes my actions moral. The other person also has to be in BDSM, and they also have to be willing for you to actually do that to them. So, the morality is very specific person to person. Atheists acknowledge this, they accept this, and theists fall flat on their face. That's why we have things like, Prop 8, when we started on that, Defense of Marriage Act, that's why we have these anti-blasphemy laws, and that's why religions basically hate one another, because as far as they're concerned, what determines their morality is what's written in some stupid book written thousands of years ago by supposedly the word of an invisible guy that no one's ever spoken to. Atheists just reject that altogether. Now, the number 2 question, where is your proof and evidence that God does not exist? And, I'll tell you right now, the real answer to this question is there is none. However, you can't just stop there, okay? Maybe there's no proof and evidence that God doesn't exist, but to atheists, it's not that they're looking for proof and evidence that God doesn't exist. They've looked for the proof and evidence that God does exist, and they have found exactly the same amount of evidence that God exists that God doesn't exist, meaning none. So, no matter how you slice that question, there's no evidence either way. And again, getting back to, why don't atheists believe in God is because they haven't seen anything that can be demonstrated, that can be repeated, that can, meet the scientific burden of proof that a God is real and that it actually exists. And really, this is not, is because it's a trap. It really tells you a lot about the character of the person who is asking it. If someone is asking, where is your proof and evidence that God doesn't exist, they are basically, in my opinion, their faith is so weak that they have to constantly be challenged, and they have to constantly, face off against people to support themselves. Okay, I don't really mind people who have faith, but if you're constantly getting up in people's faces, if you're asking, where's your proof that God doesn't exist, you're not telling them to, it's not a genuine question. You don't want to actually know whether or not God may or may not exist. You're trying to challenge this person to make you not believe. And you've done it with the presupposition that nothing this person says is going to make you not believe. And, think about it. What is that? It's dishonest. Seriously, straight up, it's dishonest. It's dishonesty in a single question. You are portraying yourself as a dishonest person when you answer that, because you're not, the answer. There's no proof that God doesn't exist, because science doesn't work that way. There either is evidence that something exists, or there's evidence that or there's no evidence that it exists. There's no evidence that something doesn't exist. Well, mathematically you can prove a negative, but in reality, when it comes down to the nuts and bolts of how everything works in the universe, you have to have physical evidence backing up that math. There's either physical evidence or there's no physical evidence. And so that's why that question's a trap. The number 1 question, the one that I actually hate the most, is, what if you're wrong? Well, see, here's the thing. Atheists don't have a problem being wrong. Atheists are wrong all the time about lots of things. And in fact, atheists, myself in particular, I love finding out when I'm wrong about stuff, because it means I no longer have to carry around this false knowledge. I don't have to be wrong anymore. Once I learn what is actually right, then what I thought was right goes away, and then I can continue on with the knowledge of what actually is right. And anytime you do that, you grow as a person. You grow intellectually, you grow emotionally, I dare say you even grow spiritually, for those of you who are spiritualists. So, finding out that you're wrong about things is not a bad thing. In fact, we've got a whole industry, we've got a whole huge group of people on this planet that are wrong, and that is how they got their job. They're called scientists. They take something that they don't know, they think they can figure it out, and then so they perform an experiment, and whoops, that wasn't it. So now we have to go back to the original premise, figure out, okay, well, that didn't work. Now let's try this. Let's go this direction. Let's just try this experiment and see if that proves anything. And then you keep doing that until you find the experiment that actually or you can create a theory that when you perform an experiment, actually the experiment supports the hypothesis, and then you can turn it into a theory. Okay? If you're not wrong about anything, you're not a scientist. Straight up. End of subject. You are not a scientist. You're not learning. You are not growing. You're not advancing. You are standing in place, clicking the ruby slippers together, saying there's no place like heaven, and hoping that you're going to end up getting there. Sorry, doesn't work that way, okay? Being wrong is not a bad thing. Theists hate being wrong. They also hate the words, I don't know. Scientists live on the word, I don't know. And in many cases, so do atheists. Now, obviously there are some atheists who, are going to sort of fall around this. I mean, there are atheists who are conspiracy theorists who think 9/11 was an inside job, blah, 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 blah. Those are the exception, not the rule. In general, atheists, you tell them whatever they're wrong, and say, they're wrong. So what? Who cares? Now, for those of you, since I live in America, I'll just go ahead and point out the Christians. It's the dominant religion here in America. I think 76% of the population identifies as some denomination of Christian, be it Mormon, Catholicism, Protestant, whatever. So I'll just go ahead and take the question from that point of view. And really, if I find that after I die, I'm standing before your God in heaven, and he's looking at me going, yeah, you should have believed, huh? See, I'm real, and heaven's right behind me, and you're not getting in. All I'm going to do is say, okay, bye, turn around, walk away. I'm going to ignore him. I'm not going to accept his judgment, and quite frankly, everything in my life up till now tells me that I have the power to do that, okay? It's this wonderful thing that you Christians like to boast about called free will. Well, that means that I get to reject God's judgment if he's real, that I'm a bad person simply because I didn't believe in him, And so, if I'm wrong and I meet you, God, that's what I'm going to do. But if I'm wrong and I meet Osiris and Horus is guiding me and my heart gets cut out and then they put it on a scale and weigh it against a feather, then hey, I'm just going to see what the scale says, and then we'll go from there. So, all right, that's my view on things. Hopefully it clears stuff up. Romapar, signing off.